Hi, everybody, and welcome back to what should be another big day here in American government. It's our third lecture. So, in the last lecture, we talked about our federal system of government and the original confederation we had back in days of yore. Today, we're going to explore the topic of federalism more fully. What exactly is federalism? How does it differ from the other types of government around the world? And what are the strengths, weaknesses, etc., etc.? So, with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Before we get started, though, I wanted to point out we have a special guest this week, my dog Mochi. He's back there sitting on the chair, I guess, having a good time helping me record, so life is good. He's going to learn some American government with us today, so we might as well go ahead and get started. There are three primary forms of government. The first is unitary, where a central government exercises all governmental powers and can change its constituent units. These tend to be countries with a strong executive. The classic example is a monarchy or dictatorship, but some other examples include Japan and France. The second is federalism. This is where the significant government powers are divided between a central government and smaller governmental units, like the United States, Mexico, India, or Canada. American-style federalism is effectively a hybrid of the Confederation and a unitary system where we have a national or federal government, then a series of semi-sovereign state governments below them. As you can see from the diagram, power flows from the federal government to the state government and from the state government to the federal government. The third type here is a confederation. This is where constituent units, or states, retain the ultimate authority and can veto major actions of the central government. Obviously, this is the type we saw under the Articles of Confederation. It's a coincidence they happen to be named that. But we see this a lot in modern institutions where multiple sovereign nations form a loose government, like the EU or the UN. These international collaborations where countries don't want to give up too much sovereignty but are willing to give up at least a little bit to the larger group. So, how do we know if we have a federal system of government? Well, in general, you have to have three general conditions. The first is that the same people and territory are included in both levels of government. So state territory, the land that makes up the state, is fully included in the federal government's territory, and there's no part of the state that isn't covered by the federal government. Think about the simplest example is the 50 states in the United States. There's no land that's part of Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, that weird thing where it sticks up above there. That's still part of the United States. It's not as if that's its own sovereign nation. Every part of each state is included in the United States of America more broadly. Number two, the nation's constitution protects units at each level of government from encroachment by the other units. So you have the Supremacy Clause listing the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, and Article 1, Section 8 lists the powers explicitly granted to the federal government. These protect the federal government from encroachment by the states. It sets up the federal government as the highest ranking branch of government. On the other side, we have the Reservations Clause in the Constitution, which gives all powers not explicitly granted to the federal government to the states, making sure states retain their own sovereignty and their own power, keeping them separate from each other. Number three, each unit is in a position to exert some leverage over the other. States send representatives to the Senate and elect the president, while the federal government has any number of ways, obviously, of exerting leverage over the states, which we'll talk about as the course goes on. The important thing to note here is that federalism is a relatively uncommon way of organizing your government. Most nations choose unitary systems because they're much cleaner and easier, especially in American federalism, where we have a multiplicity of governing levels and units with states, cities, counties, even neighborhoods represented by pseudo-governments known as homeowners or property owners associations, etc., etc. And there aren't really any neat boundaries among these different forms. As confidently as people will assert something is authorized or restricted by the Constitution, or that certain powers are granted to the states and aren't part of the federal government's domain, we really don't know for sure until the Supreme Court rules on these things, and that happens in a way that evolves over time. It's ever-changing. However, modern federalism is largely an American invention. One big reason the federal government works for us is because we are so large geographically and so diverse in terms of our needs across different regions, across different states, with a wide range of opinions on any number of issues. This lets us stay united despite ever-increasing polarization.